What if everything you believed about your life, your family, and your purpose suddenly fell apart in a single day? What if a stranger entered your life with secrets that could change everything, but you dismissed them as nothing more than lies? This is the story of Amelia Harper, a woman whose world crumbles before her eyes, forcing her to confront betrayal, hidden truths, and an unimaginable legacy. Stay tuned as we unravel a tale filled with twists, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This is a story you won't want to miss. It was the kind of evening that promised nothing more than routine, but for Amelia Harper, it would be the night everything changed. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Phoenix Hotel in Manhattan was heavy with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft strains of a jazz quartet. Amelia moved swiftly between tables, her uniform crisp, her smile practiced. The life of a waitress wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. Her dream of becoming a fashion designer was just that, a dream. She scribbled sketches during her breaks, imagining the day her work would be seen on the streets of New York. But reality had a way of pulling her back. The long hours, rude customers, and the suffocating weight of bills that never stopped piling up reminded her of how far she was from that dream. As Amelia served another round of champagne, a sudden shout echoed from the kitchen. Smoke began billowing into the room, and within seconds, chaos erupted. Guests screamed, chairs toppled, and the once elegant ballroom became a scene of utter panic. Amelia dropped her tray and ran towards the exit, but something made her stop, a muffled cry for help. In the corner of the room, she spotted an older man trapped beneath a fallen table, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Without hesitation, she rushed to his side, lifting the heavy table with all her strength. "Come on, you can make it," she shouted, her voice hoarse from the smoke. The man nodded weakly, and with her help, he hobbled towards safety. Outside, fire trucks lined the street, their sirens piercing the night. Amelia gasped for air, her lungs burning, but she felt a flicker of pride. She had done something good. That flicker was extinguished moments later when her manager stormed toward her, fury etched across his face. "What were you thinking, Harper?" he spat. "You abandoned your station and caused this chaos." Amelia's mouth fell open. "What? I didn't. There was a fire. I saved." "I don't want to hear excuses," he interrupted. "You're fired. Get off the property before I call security." Tears stung her eyes as she looked around. Guests who had once ignored her now glared at her as if she were the cause of their ruined evening. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but no words came. Clutching her bag, she walked away, the weight of the night pressing down on her. As if losing her job weren't enough, Amelia returned to her tiny apartment only to find an eviction notice taped to her door. Unpaid rent, it read in bold letters. Her landlord, Mr. Grayson, appeared moments later, his expression cold. "You're 2 months behind," he said flatly. "I've been patient, but I need that unit for someone who can actually pay." "Please, Mr. Grayson," Amelia begged. "I just lost my job. Give me a week, and I'll—" "No more chances," he snapped, walking away without a second glance. Amelia slumped against the doorframe, her mind racing. Where would she go? How had her life spiraled so far out of control? She grabbed a duffel bag, stuffing it with whatever clothes she could fit, and stepped out into the cold New York night. As she wandered aimlessly, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Rough night." She turned to see a man leaning against a lamppost, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. His dark hair was tousled, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to study her intently. "I don't need your pity," Amelia snapped, brushing past him. "I wasn't offering pity," he replied, falling into step beside her. "Just making an observation." "Who are you, anyway?" she demanded, stopping to glare at him. "Ethan," he said simply. "And you?" "None of your business," she shot back, continuing down the street. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan Clark wasn't just another stranger. He was a millionaire, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the country. But tonight, he wasn't Ethan Clark, the tycoon. Tonight, he was Ethan, a man blending into the shadows, seeking something real. He watched Amelia walk away, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Interesting, he muttered to himself. The night dragged on, and Amelia found herself at a homeless shelter on the outskirts of the city. The rows of cots, the muted conversations, and the faint smell of disinfectant were a far cry from the comfort she had known. But for now, it was all she had. As she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted to the old man she had saved. She had no idea who he was or if he had made it out of the fire unscathed. All she knew was that her act of bravery had cost her everything. Across town, Ethan sat in his penthouse, his mind replaying their brief encounter. Something about Amelia intrigued him. The fire in her eyes, the defiance in her tone. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to her. What he didn't realize was that their paths were about to cross again in a way neither of them could have predicted. For Amelia, the night was far from over. Just as she began to drift off, a piercing scream echoed through the shelter. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. The woman in the next cot clutched a piece of paper, her face pale. "They're taking my baby," she sobbed. Amelia rushed to her side, instinct taking over. "What happened?" she asked gently. "The system," the woman cried. "They say I'm unfit, but I'm doing everything I can." Amelia didn't know what to say. She barely had control over her own life, let alone the ability to help someone else. But as she held the woman's trembling hands, a spark ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to turn her own pain into something meaningful. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning, and the stranger from the street would soon become an inescapable part of it. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of the shelter, casting long shadows over the rows of cots. Amelia woke up groggy, her back aching from the thin mattress. The cries of the distraught mother from the night before still echoed in her mind, reminding her that her problems, while overwhelming, weren't unique. The shelter was filled with people carrying their own stories of loss and struggle, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Amelia stretched and sat up, glancing around the room. The woman she'd comforted was gone, leaving behind only a crumpled blanket. Amelia frowned. Had she left on her own, or had something happened? The question lingered as she grabbed her few belongings and headed toward the common area. The shelter was bustling with activity. Volunteers handed out breakfast, and the smell of burnt coffee filled the air. Amelia shuffled into line, her stomach growling. As she reached for a cup of coffee, a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Well, look who decided to show up." Amelia turned to see Ethan leaning casually against the counter, a smirk on his face. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. "What are you doing here?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "I could ask you the same thing," Ethan replied, his tone light but probing. "Rough night." Amelia ignored him, grabbing her coffee and walking away. She had no time for his mysterious act. If he wanted to play the role of a charming drifter, he could do it with someone else. But Ethan wasn't easily deterred. He followed her to a table, sliding into the seat across from her. "Look, I'm not here to bother you," he said, his tone softening. "I just thought you might need someone to talk to." Amelia stared at him, trying to read his expression. There was something genuine about his demeanor, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. "Why do you care?" she asked bluntly. "Let's just say I've been where you are," Ethan said, avoiding her gaze. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. While he hadn't experienced the same struggles, his own family drama had left him feeling lost and disconnected, but that wasn't something he was ready to share. Amelia sighed, her walls lowering slightly. "If you've been where I am, then you know I don't need pity." "It's not pity," Ethan said quickly. "It's curiosity." Amelia let out a bitter laugh. "Well, don't waste your curiosity on me. I'm just another charity case." The conversation was interrupted by the shelter's director, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Amelia Harper?" she called out. Amelia stood, her heart sinking. "What now?" She approached the director, who handed her a letter. "This came for you." Amelia frowned, tearing open the envelope. The letter was from a law firm, its elegant stationery starkly out of place in the shelter. Her hands trembled as she read the words. "You are hereby summoned to appear regarding the estate of Richard Harper." "Richard Harper?" she whispered, her mind racing. The name was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, appearing at her side. Amelia folded the letter quickly. "None of your business." But the letter was all she could think about as the day wore on. Who was Richard Harper, and why would a law firm contact her about his estate? The mystery gnawed at her, but she had no resources to investigate. Her only option was to show up at the address listed and hope for answers. Later that afternoon, Amelia found herself standing outside a sleek office building in Midtown Manhattan. The contrast between the gleaming skyscraper and her shabby clothes couldn't have been starker. She hesitated at the entrance, feeling out of place, but the curiosity, and the faint hope that this might lead to something good, drove her forward. The receptionist barely glanced at her as she announced her arrival. "Take a seat," the woman said curtly, motioning to the plush chairs in the waiting area. Amelia sat, clutching her bag tightly. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before a well-dressed lawyer emerged. "Miss Harper," he said, his tone polite but distant. "Follow me." She was led into a conference room where a large portrait of an older man hung on the wall. Amelia stared at the painting, her heart skipping a beat. She recognized the man. It was the one she had saved from the fire. The lawyer cleared his throat, drawing her attention. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming. I understand this must be overwhelming, but we have some matters to discuss regarding the late Mr. Richard Harper." "Late?" Amelia echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. He passed away?" The lawyer nodded solemnly. "He succumbed to his injuries from the fire. However, before his passing, he made it clear that you were to be contacted regarding his estate." Amelia's mind reeled. Why would this man, a stranger, include her in his will? She barely knew him. The lawyer handed her a folder, its contents detailing a substantial sum of money and a property in upstate New York. "Mr. Harper believed you deserved a second chance," he explained. "He was deeply moved by your actions that night." Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Just days ago, she had been evicted and humiliated. Now, she was being offered a lifeline. But as she read through the documents, a sense of unease settled over her. This was too good to be true. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. The lawyer hesitated. "There's no catch, Parisi. However, Mr. Harper's family may contest his decision. They believe the estate should remain within the family." Amelia's stomach churned. Of course there was a catch. She wasn't just inheriting money. She was inheriting a fight. Back at the shelter, Amelia tried to process everything. She hadn't told anyone about the inheritance, not even Ethan. But as the days passed, she began to notice strange things. Whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room, sideways glances from the other residents, and most unsettling of all, Rachel, the shelter's self-appointed queen bee, snooping through her belongings. One evening, as Amelia returned to her cot, she found Rachel sitting on it, holding the envelope from the lawyer. "You've been hiding something," Rachel said with a sly smile. "Care to share?" Amelia snatched the envelope from her hands. "Stay out of my business." "Too late," Rachel replied. "Word gets around. You've got money coming your way, don't you?" Amelia's heart sank. If Rachel knew, it wouldn't be long before everyone else did. And in a place like this, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. That night, as she lay awake, Amelia realized two things. She couldn't trust anyone, and her life was about to get a lot more complicated. The morning after Rachel's confrontation, Amelia woke with an uneasy feeling. The tension in the shelter was palpable. Whispers followed her as she walked through the hallways. Rachel must have already spread the word. It didn't matter that Amelia didn't have access to the money yet. In the eyes of the others, she was already someone to envy and someone to exploit. Amelia decided she couldn't stay there any longer. The shelter had been a temporary refuge, but now it felt more like a trap. Gathering her belongings, she made her way to the door, but Ethan intercepted her. leaning casually against the frame as if he'd been waiting for her. "Running away again?" he asked, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "Not running," Amelia replied curtly. "Leaving." Ethan studied her, his head tilted slightly. "You know, whatever you're dealing with, it's not going to get easier out there." Amelia sighed, clutching her bag tighter. "I don't need your advice, Ethan. I've been taking care of myself for years." "And how's that working out for you?" he shot back, his voice soft but pointed. Amelia froze, his words hitting a nerve. She hated how perceptive he was, how he seemed to see right through her defenses. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said firmly, pushing past him. Ethan didn't follow, but his gaze lingered on her as she disappeared into the city streets. Something about Amelia fascinated him. Her resilience, her defiance, her refusal to let anyone help her even when she clearly needed it. He wasn't ready to give up on her yet. Amelia spent the next few hours wandering aimlessly, her mind racing. The idea of the inheritance felt like both a blessing and a curse. She couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it would only bring more trouble. But where else could she turn? She had no job, no home, and no one she could trust. As the sun began to set, she found herself outside the office building where she had met the lawyer. On a whim, she decided to go back inside. Maybe he could give her more answers she desperately needed. The receptionist gave her the same cold greeting as before, and after a long wait, the lawyer appeared, looking slightly surprised to see her. "Miss Harper," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "I need to know more," Amelia said as she took a seat in his office. "Why did Richard Harper choose me? What did he expect me to do with all of this?" The lawyer hesitated, then handed her a folder containing a letter written in Richard's handwriting. "He wanted you to have this." Amelia unfolded the letter, her hands trembling. The words were simple but deeply personal. "Amelia, your courage saved my life that night, even if only for a short while. I saw a fire in you that reminded me of someone I lost long ago. You deserve a second chance, and I hope this will help you find it. Use this gift wisely." Tears blurred her vision as she read the letter. She didn't know Richard Harper, but his words touched something deep inside her. A sense of validation she hadn't felt in years. But before she could fully process the letter, the lawyer cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know," he said carefully. "Mr. Harper's family has already filed a preliminary motion to contest the will. They believe you manipulated him during his final moments." "What?" Amelia's voice rose, her shock quickly turning to anger. "I didn't even know who he was until after he died. How could I manipulate him?" "They're claiming your actions were calculated," the lawyer explained. "That you saw an opportunity and took advantage of it." Amelia stood, her fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. I risked my life to save him, and this is how they repay me." "I understand your frustration," the lawyer said calmly, "but his family is powerful. They'll do everything they can to discredit you." Amelia left the office feeling more defeated than ever. She had done the right thing, saved a man's life, and yet she was being punished for it. As she walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan, a question nagged at her. Who was Richard Harper's family, and why were they so determined to destroy her? Her thoughts were interrupted when a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a striking woman with sharp features and a cold smile. "Miss Harper, I presume?" Amelia stopped, her heart pounding. "Who's asking?" "I'm Victoria Harper," the woman said smoothly. "Richard was my father." Amelia's stomach dropped. This was the family she was up against. Victoria stepped out of the car, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. She looked Amelia up and down, her disdain evident. "I wanted to see the woman who managed to steal my father's fortune," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I didn't steal anything," Amelia shot back. "Your father made his own choices." Victoria smirked. "You must think you're very clever playing the hero. But let me make one thing clear. You don't belong in our world, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you don't get a single cent of my father's money." Before Amelia could respond, Victoria climbed back into the car, slamming the door. The car sped off, leaving Amelia standing on the sidewalk, her blood boiling. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. Later that night, as Amelia sat alone in a diner, trying to process everything, a shadow fell across her table. She looked up to see Ethan standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. She was too tired to argue. Ethan slid into the seat across from her, studying her carefully. "You look like you've been through hell," he said. "You have no idea," Amelia muttered, stirring her coffee. Ethan leaned forward, his tone serious. "Try me." For the first time, Amelia opened up, telling him about the inheritance, the will, and her encounter with Victoria. Ethan listened intently, his jaw tightening as she described the Harper family's threats. "You can't let them intimidate you," he said firmly. "You have just as much right to that money as they do. Maybe more." Amelia sighed. "It's not just about the money. It's about proving that I'm not the person they think I am." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Then prove it. Fight back." Amelia looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. But as she glanced out the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight ahead would be harder than she could imagine. The next morning, Amelia woke with a sense of dread gnawing at her. The events of the previous day played over in her mind like a broken record. The letter, Victoria Harper's threat, and Ethan's surprising encouragement. For years, Amelia had faced the world alone, relying only on herself. Trusting anyone, let alone someone like Ethan, felt like a gamble she wasn't ready to take. But the thought of fighting the Harper family by herself felt impossible. Determined to gain control of the situation, Amelia decided to visit the property upstate that Richard Harper had left her. She needed to see it for herself, to understand why the Harpers were so determined to take it back. If she was going to fight them, she needed to know what she was fighting for. The train ride out of the city was quiet, the rumble of the tracks providing a strange sense of calm. As she stared out the window, the towering skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. For the first time in weeks, Amelia felt a glimmer of peace. But that peace was shattered the moment she arrived at the property. The house was an old Victorian mansion, its once grand exterior now weathered and overgrown with ivy. The driveway was littered with leaves, and the garden had long since been claimed by nature. Yet despite its state of disrepair, there was something undeniably beautiful about the place. Amelia could see why someone like Richard Harper would cherish it. She pushed open the heavy front door, the creak echoing through the empty halls. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the broken windows, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Amelia wandered from room to room, taking in the remnants of a life long forgotten. Faded photographs on the mantel, a cracked porcelain vase in the corner, and stacks of old newspapers piled high in the study. As she explored, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and her steps grew hesitant. In the kitchen, she found a note pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message sent a chill down her spine. "Leave while you still can." Amelia's heart pounded as she scanned the room, searching for any sign of someone else. The house was silent except for the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. Clutching the note, she backed toward the door, every instinct telling her to run. But just as she reached the foyer, a voice stopped her. "Who the hell are you?" Amelia spun around to see a man standing in the doorway, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was tall and rugged, with a scowl that made her take a step back. "I could ask you the same thing," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is private property," the man said, his tone sharp. "You have no right to be here." Amelia straightened her spine, her fear quickly giving way to anger. "Actually, I do. Richard Harper left this house to me in his will." The man's scowl deepened. "You're the one they're all talking about. The city girl who thinks she can waltz in and take what doesn't belong to her." "I didn't ask for this," Amelia snapped. "But I'm not going to let the Harper family bully me into giving it up." The man stepped closer, his piercing eyes locked on hers. "You think you can handle them? The Harpers don't just take what they want. They destroy anyone who stands in their way. Amelia's resolve faltered, but she refused to let him see her fear. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Jack," he said simply. "I used to work for Richard Harper. And if you're smart, you'll turn around and walk away before you get yourself in deeper than you can handle." Amelia didn't respond, her mind racing. Jack's warning echoed Victoria's, but she couldn't let herself be intimidated. This house was the only tangible proof that her life could change, that she could be more than the struggling waitress everyone underestimated. Instead of leaving, Amelia spent the next few hours cleaning up the house, determined to make it livable. The work was exhausting, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. Jack lingered nearby, watching her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. By the time the sun began to set, Amelia was too tired to argue when Jack offered her a ride back to the train station. The drive was tense, the silence between them heavy. But as they neared the station, Jack finally spoke. "You're stubborn. I'll give you that," he said, his tone softer than before. "But if you're going to stay in this fight, you need to know what you're up against." Amelia turned to him, her exhaustion giving way to curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Richard Harper wasn't a saint," Jack said. "He had his secrets, and so does his family. If you dig deep enough, you're going to find things you might not want to know." Amelia frowned, her mind racing with questions. But before she could press him further, Jack pulled up to the station and stopped the car. "Good luck, city girl," he said, his expression unreadable. As Amelia stepped onto the train, her thoughts were consumed by Jack's warning. What kind of secrets had Richard Harper been hiding? And how far would the Harper family go to keep those secrets buried? Back in Manhattan, Amelia returned to the shelter to find the tension had reached a boiling point. Rachel was waiting for her, flanked by a group of residents who looked ready for a fight. "Look who decided to come back," Rachel sneered. "Thought you'd run off to your fancy mansion and leave us behind?" "I don't owe you an explanation," Amelia said, pushing past her. But Rachel grabbed her arm, her nails digging into Amelia's skin. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Rachel hissed. "Just because some rich guy left you a house?" Amelia yanked her arm free, her voice steady but firm. "I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I won't let you or anyone else make me feel like I don't deserve a chance." The confrontation left Amelia shaken, but it also strengthened her resolve. If she was going to survive this, she needed allies and answers. The Harper family wasn't just a threat. They were a mystery she was determined to unravel. And as she lay awake that night, one thing became clear. She couldn't do it alone. Her thoughts turned to Ethan. Maybe, just maybe, he was the ally she needed. But could she trust him? That was a question she wasn't ready to answer yet. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of the shelter, casting long shadows across the room. Amelia sat at the edge of her cot, her mind a swirl of exhaustion and determination. The confrontation with Rachel the night before had left her shaken, but it also solidified something inside her. She couldn't afford to back down. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about proving to the world, and to herself, that she could rise above the mess her life had become. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the shelter's main door. A moment later, Ethan appeared in the doorway of the common area, his presence as confident as ever. He didn't belong here. His crisp shirt and polished boots were a stark contrast to the worn clothes of the residents. But somehow he fit. He had a way of blending in, of making people feel comfortable despite his clear differences. Amelia groaned inwardly. What did he want now? "I heard there was some drama last night," Ethan said as he approached her, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "You okay?" "I don't need your help," Amelia replied, standing up and crossing her arms. "I can handle Rachel." "I don't doubt that," Ethan said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "But you can't handle the Harpers alone." Amelia stiffened at the mention of the family. "And what do you know about the Harpers?" "More than you think," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "They don't just fight to win, they fight to destroy. And if you don't have a plan, they'll tear you apart." Amelia hesitated, her defenses wavering. She hated to admit it, but Ethan was right. She didn't have a plan. She had no idea how to fight a family with the wealth and influence of the Harpers. And as much as she didn't want to rely on anyone, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that she was in over her head. "What do you suggest?" she asked reluctantly. Ethan smiled, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "Let's start with information. You need to know who you're dealing with." He handed her a folder, thick with documents. Amelia opened it cautiously, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. Inside were detailed profiles on every member of the Harper family. Victoria, Richard's icy daughter, Daniel, his ruthless brother, and even Jack, the man she'd met at the mansion. There were photos, financial records, and even a few emails that hinted at internal conflicts within the family. "Where did you get this?" Amelia asked, her voice a mix of suspicion and awe. "I have my ways," Ethan replied cryptically. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on them for a while." Amelia's mind raced as she flipped through the folder. The Harpers weren't just a family. They were a dynasty. And like any dynasty, they had their secrets and their weaknesses. One name caught her attention: Daniel Harper. Unlike Victoria, who exuded cold professionalism, Daniel's profile painted a picture of a man consumed by ambition. He was the one who had orchestrated the legal challenge against her inheritance. If anyone could explain why the Harpers were so determined to erase her from the will, it was him. "I need to talk to him," Amelia said, closing the folder. Ethan's smile faltered. "That's not a good idea. Daniel doesn't play fair, and he won't hesitate to use you as a pawn." "I don't care," Amelia said firmly. "If he wants to fight me, then he can say it to my face." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "At least let me come with you." Amelia hesitated. She wasn't used to relying on others, especially someone as enigmatic as Ethan. But she couldn't deny that having him by her side might make things easier. "Fine," she said finally. "But don't get in my way." Ethan chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." The two of them arrived at Daniel Harper's downtown office later that afternoon. The building was sleek and imposing, its glass facade reflecting the bustling streets of Manhattan. Amelia's nerves were on edge as they stepped into the elevator, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was her fight, and she couldn't afford to show weakness. When they reached Daniel's office, a sharply dressed assistant greeted them with a practiced smile. "Mr. Harper is expecting you," she said, gesturing toward the large double doors. Amelia exchanged a glance with Ethan before pushing the doors open. The office was as intimidating as the man who occupied it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city, while the minimalist decor exuded power and control. Daniel Harper sat behind a massive desk, his piercing eyes locking onto Amelia the moment she entered. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're the one causing all this trouble." Amelia stepped forward, her chin held high. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm just claiming what's rightfully mine." Daniel chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You think Richard's little act of charity makes you one of us? You don't belong in this world, Miss Harper. And if you're smart, you'll walk away before you get hurt." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not walking away." Daniel's expression darkened, his smile vanishing. "You should be afraid. Because once I'm done with you, there won't be anything left." Ethan stepped forward, his presence a silent but powerful show of support. "Careful, Daniel," he said, his tone casual but firm. "You wouldn't want to underestimate her." Daniel's eyes narrowed, flicking between Ethan and Amelia. "And who are you supposed to be? Her knight in shining armor?" "I'm just a friend," Ethan replied smoothly. "But friends can be dangerous, too." The tension in the room was thick, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Amelia met Daniel's gaze head-on, refusing to back down. She could feel the weight of his power, but she also felt something else, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. "Enjoy your little victory while you can," Daniel said finally, his voice dripping with disdain. "Because it won't last." Amelia turned on her heel and walked out, Ethan close behind. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't afford to let Daniel see how much he had rattled her. As they stepped out into the street, Ethan turned to her with a grin. "You handled that better than I expected." Amelia smirked, though her hands were still trembling. Don't get used to it. But as they walked away, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wasn't done with her yet. If anything, their confrontation had only made him more determined to take her down. And deep down, she knew that the real fight was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Amelia couldn't shake the confrontation with Daniel Harper from her mind. His threats echoed in her head, and though she hated to admit it, she was scared. But fear wasn't an option. If she backed down now, she'd lose everything. Not just the inheritance, but her chance to prove to herself and the world that she wasn't a victim. Ethan had been sticking close, much to her annoyance. He seemed to appear at every turn, offering help, advice, and occasionally his maddening smirk. Amelia couldn't figure him out. Why did he care so much? What did he gain by helping her? One evening, as they walked back to the shelter after a long day of researching the Harper family, Amelia finally asked him, "Why are you doing this, Ethan? Why do you care what happens to me?" Ethan paused, his hands in his pockets, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be underestimated," he said after a moment. "And maybe because I see something in you, a fire, a fight. You remind me of someone I used to know." "Who?" Amelia asked, her voice softening despite herself. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Someone who didn't make it," he said quietly. The vulnerability in his voice caught Amelia off guard. For the first time, she saw past the charm and confidence to the man underneath. He was carrying his own scars, just like her. Amelia didn't press him further, but something shifted between them that night. A fragile thread of trust began to form, though neither of them acknowledged it. The next morning, Amelia woke to find the shelter in chaos. Rachel, who had been unusually quiet in recent days, was screaming at one of the volunteers. "You think I don't know what's going on?" she shouted, her voice shrill. "She's playing all of you, pretending to be one of us while she's sitting on a fortune." Amelia froze, her heart sinking. It didn't take long to realize Rachel was talking about her. "You don't know what you're talking about," Amelia said, stepping forward. Rachel whirled around, her eyes blazing. "Don't I? Everyone here knows you're the girl who's about to cash in on some rich guy's guilt money. And yet you're still here, taking up space like the rest of us. That's enough, Rachel," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm as he appeared at Amelia's side. "Of course you're defending her," Rachel sneered. "You're just hoping to get a piece of the pie, too." Amelia's fists clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Believe what you want, Rachel," she said. "But I'm not leaving until I'm ready." Rachel stormed off, but the damage was done. The tension in the shelter was palpable, and Amelia knew she couldn't stay much longer. Later that day, she packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye. Ethan insisted on coming with her, though she protested. "Where are you even going to go?" he asked as they walked through the city. "I don't know," Amelia admitted. "But I can't stay there." "Then come with me," Ethan said, his tone serious. Amelia stopped, staring at him. "What are you talking about?" "I have a place," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's safe. You'll have space to think, to figure out your next move." Amelia hesitated. Letting Ethan into her life had already been a risk, but now he was asking her to trust him completely. But what choice did she have? The shelter wasn't an option anymore, and she couldn't fight the Harpers while living on the streets. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "But this doesn't mean I trust you." "Fair enough," Ethan said with a small smile. Ethan's place turned out to be a modest apartment on the edge of the city. It was surprisingly clean and comfortable, though sparsely furnished. Amelia dropped her bag on the couch and looked around, trying to hide her curiosity. "How does someone like you end up in a place like this?" she asked. Ethan shrugged, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Sometimes it's easier to stay under the radar." His answer was vague, but Amelia didn't push. She was too tired to care. She sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her. Over the next few days, Ethan proved to be an invaluable ally. He used his connections to gather more information on the Harpers, uncovering details about their business dealings and internal conflicts. It turned out that Daniel Harper was embroiled in a legal battle with another family member, a cousin named Margaret, over control of the family's real estate empire. The inheritance Richard had left to Amelia was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Amelia couldn't help but wonder if Daniel's vendetta against her was less about money and more about control. If she kept the inheritance, it could weaken his position within the family. That realization only strengthened her resolve. But their progress came at a cost. Late one night, as Amelia and Ethan pored over documents at his apartment, the sound of glass shattering startled them both. They rushed to the window to see a brick lying on the floor, shards of glass surrounding it. A note was tied to the brick, its message chilling in its simplicity. "Back off." Amelia's hands trembled as she held the note. "They know where I am," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts kicking in. "We'll figure this out," he said. "But you need to be careful. They're playing dirty." Amelia nodded, though fear clawed at her insides. She had known the Harpers wouldn't give up easily, but this was a clear escalation. They weren't just trying to intimidate her, they were trying to scare her into submission. The next day, Ethan suggested they visit the mansion upstate again. "If they're threatening you, it means you're getting close to something they don't want you to find," he said. "Maybe there's something at the house that can give us more leverage." Reluctantly, Amelia agreed. The drive upstate was tense, neither of them saying much. When they arrived, the mansion was just as they had left it, except for one glaring detail. The front door was wide open. Ethan parked the car, and they approached cautiously. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Amelia's pulse quickened as they searched room by room, finding nothing out of place, until they reached the study. On the desk was an envelope addressed to Amelia. She opened it with trembling hands, revealing a single sheet of paper. The message was clear and terrifying. "This isn't your fight. Walk away or you'll regret it." Amelia's fear turned to anger as she crumpled the note. "I'm not walking away," she said through gritted teeth. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "Then we fight back." For the first time, Amelia felt the beginnings of hope. She didn't know how they would win, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The drive back to the city was silent. The weight of the threat hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Amelia began to question if she was in over her head. The Harpers weren't just wealthy, they were dangerous. They had resources, power, and connections that made them nearly untouchable. But as much as fear gnawed at her, something deeper began to burn: defiance. She refused to let them bully her into giving up what was rightfully hers. Ethan, sensing her unease, broke the silence. "You don't have to do this, he said softly. "You could walk away, take the money they're probably offering under the table, and start fresh somewhere far from here." Amelia shot him a look, her voice sharp. "That's exactly what they want. They think I'm just some nobody who'll fold the moment things get tough." "You're not nobody," Ethan said firmly, "but you have to be smart about this. Fighting them isn't just a matter of standing your ground. It's a matter of survival." Amelia didn't respond. She appreciated Ethan's concern, but she wasn't about to let fear dictate her decisions. She'd spent her entire life struggling to find her place in the world. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was her chance to prove that she mattered, that she was capable of more than just scraping by. When they returned to Ethan's apartment, Amelia found herself pacing restlessly. The note left at the mansion was a clear message. The Harpers were willing to do whatever it took to make her disappear. She knew she needed to act fast before they escalated their tactics. "Let's dig deeper into Daniel," Amelia said suddenly, turning to Ethan. "If he's the one leading this charge against me, there has to be something we can use against him." Ethan nodded, grabbing his laptop. "I've been looking into his financial dealings. There's something off about his records. Some assets that don't quite add up. If we can find proof of fraud or embezzlement, it could give us leverage." As Ethan worked, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every move they made felt like a gamble, and the stakes were only getting higher. Her thoughts were interrupted when Ethan suddenly cursed under his breath. "What is it?" she asked, moving to stand behind him. "Daniel has been funneling money into offshore accounts," Ethan explained, pointing to a series of transactions on the screen. But the accounts are linked to someone named Jack Harper. Amelia froze. Jack? The man from the mansion? Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed. I don't think Jack's just some disgruntled former employee. He's tied to the family in ways we don't fully understand. The revelation sent a chill down Amelia's spine. Jack had warned her about the Harpers, but now it seemed he was part of their web. Was he trying to help her? Or was he another pawn in Daniel's game? The next day, Amelia decided to confront Jack. She couldn't afford to second-guess his intentions. If he was working against her, she needed to know. Ethan insisted on coming with her, and together, they drove back to the mansion. Jack was there, standing on the overgrown lawn, his expression unreadable as they approached. He didn't look surprised to see them. I figured you'd be back, he said, his voice calm but guarded. Amelia didn't waste time on pleasantries. Why didn't you tell me you're a Harper? Jack's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. Because it doesn't matter. I'm not like them. Then why are you tied to Daniel's financial dealings? Amelia pressed, her tone sharp. Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Amelia thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because I'm trying to take him down. Amelia blinked, caught off guard. What? Daniel's been laundering money through the family's businesses for years, Jack explained. When Richard found out, he cut him off and named me as his successor. But Daniel wouldn't accept that. He's been trying to destroy me ever since. Amelia's mind raced as she processed Jack's words. If what he was saying was true, then Daniel's vendetta wasn't just about her. It was about consolidating his power within the family. Why didn't you tell me this before? Amelia demanded. Because I didn't trust you, Jack admitted. And honestly, I still don't. But if you're serious about taking on Daniel, we're going to need each other. Ethan stepped forward, his arms crossed. How do we know you're not just using Amelia to get what you want? Jack met Ethan's gaze evenly. You don't. But if you're smart, you'll realize that working together is the only way any of us are going to survive this. Amelia hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust Jack. But at the same time, his story felt genuine. And if he really was trying to take down Daniel, then aligning with him might be their best chance at winning. Fine, she said finally. But if I find out you're lying... I'm not, Jack interrupted. And if you're serious about this, I suggest we start by hitting Daniel where it hurts. Jack led them inside the mansion, where he pulled out a hidden safe behind a bookshelf. Inside was a collection of documents, ledgers, contracts, and correspondence, all detailing Daniel's illegal activities. This is enough to bury him, Jack said, handing the files to Amelia. But it won't be easy. He has friends in high places. Amelia's grip on the documents tightened. I don't care how powerful he is. He's not going to get away with this. Jack nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Good, because once we start this, there's no turning back. As they left the mansion that evening, Amelia felt a mix of fear and determination. The fight against the Harpers was about to reach a boiling point, and she knew the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time, she felt like she had a real chance at winning. With Ethan and Jack by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Yet as they drove back to the city, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Secrets still buried, alliances still unclear, and in the shadows, Daniel Harper was surely preparing his next move. The city skyline glimmered in the evening light as Amelia sat at Ethan's kitchen table. The stolen documents from Jack spread out before her. Each page was damning. A web of offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, and evidence of backdoor dealings that tied Daniel Harper to years of corruption. Yet, as powerful as the evidence seemed, Amelia couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. If Daniel caught wind of what they had, he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. Ethan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed as he watched her. What's the plan? He asked. Amelia looked up, her expression resolute. We take this public. Public? Ethan repeated, his tone cautious. You mean the media? Yes, Amelia said firmly. We can't go through the courts. Daniel will crush us before we even have a chance to file anything. But if we expose him to the world, he won't be able to hide. Ethan frowned, clearly uneasy. You're talking about going to war with one of the most powerful families in the country. Are you sure about this? Amelia met his gaze, her voice steady. I don't have a choice. Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at the door. They both froze, their eyes darting to the pile of documents on the table. Ethan moved cautiously toward the door, glancing through the peephole before opening it. To Amelia's surprise, Jack stepped inside, his expression grim. We've got a problem, Jack said, closing the door behind him. What kind of problem? Amelia asked, her stomach sinking. Daniel knows about the documents, Jack said. I don't know how, but he does. And he's already making moves to discredit you. Amelia's hands clenched into fists. Of course he is. What else is new? This isn't just about you, Jack continued. He's going after anyone who's helped you. That means me, Ethan, and anyone else who's crossed his path. Amelia's heart raced. She had expected retaliation, but not so soon, and not on this scale. What do we do? She asked, her voice tinged with urgency. We get ahead of him, Jack said. There's a reporter I know, someone who's been digging into the Harpers for years. If we can get these documents to her, she'll blow this story wide open. Amelia hesitated. Trusting a stranger with something this big felt like a gamble, but Jack's plan made sense. The Harpers thrived on secrecy, and exposing their crimes was the only way to level the playing field. Fine, she said finally. Let's do it. The following day, Amelia, Ethan, and Jack met the reporter at a small cafe in Brooklyn. Her name was Lauren Bishop, a seasoned investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down powerful figures. She was sharp, no nonsense, and, to Amelia's relief, genuinely interested in the story. These documents are explosive, Lauren said as she flipped through the files. But if I'm going to publish this, I need more. Interviews, on-the-record statements, something that ties it all together. Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. I'll give you whatever you need. Lauren glanced at Jack. And you? Are you willing to go on the record? Jack hesitated, his jaw tightening. If it means taking Daniel down, then yes. Lauren's expression softened, but her tone remained firm. This won't be easy. Once this story breaks, you'll be targets. Are you ready for that? Amelia's voice was steady. We've been targets for weeks. This is the only way to end it. Lauren nodded, gathering the documents. I'll start working on this tonight, but be prepared. Once this goes live, there's no going back. As they left the cafe, Amelia felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. For the first time, it felt like they were on the offensive, but the stakes had never been higher. Every step forward brought them closer to the truth, and closer to the Harpers' wrath. That evening, back at Ethan's apartment, the three of them pored over their next steps. They needed to prepare for the fallout both legally and personally. But before they could finalize their plans, Amelia's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello, Miss Harper, came a familiar voice. It was Victoria. I'm calling as a courtesy. Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. A courtesy? Yes, Victoria said smoothly. To let you know that you've made a grave mistake. Whatever you think you're accomplishing with these documents, it won't work. You're playing a game you can't win. Amelia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. The only mistake I made was not going after your family sooner. Victoria's voice turned icy. You don't understand who you're dealing with. My father may have seen something in you, but I don't. You're just another parasite trying to take what isn't yours. Amelia's anger flared. Your father left me that inheritance because he saw the kind of person you are. A selfish, entitled bully who thinks money can buy anything. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment Amelia thought Victoria might lash out. But when she spoke again, her tone was eerily calm. Enjoy your little crusade while it lasts, because soon you'll realize just how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours. The line went dead, leaving Amelia shaking with a mix of anger and fear. She relayed the conversation to Ethan and Jack, who exchanged worried looks. She's bluffing, Ethan said, though his tone lacked conviction. They're trying to scare you. She's not bluffing, Jack said quietly. The Harpers don't bluff. The room fell silent as the weight of Jack's words sank in. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The Harpers were coming for them, and the only way to survive was to stay one step ahead. The next morning, Lauren called with an update. The story was ready to go live, but she needed Amelia and Jack to come to the station for a final interview. As they prepared to leave, a black SUV pulled up outside the apartment. 3 men in suits stepped out, their presence unmistakably threatening. "They're here," Ethan said, peering through the window. Amelia's pulse quickened. "What do we do?" "We don't let them intimidate us," Jack said, his voice steady. "Stay calm. They're not going to do anything in broad daylight." But as the men approached the door, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the Harpers were done playing games. The fight was no longer just about money or power, it was personal. And Amelia knew that the next move would decide everything. The knock on the door echoed through the apartment like a warning shot. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as Ethan motioned for her and Jack to stay back. He opened the door a crack, just enough to see the 3 suited men standing in the hallway. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, gave a thin smile. "Mr. Clark, Miss Harper, we'd like to have a word." Ethan's grip tightened on the door. "And who exactly are you?" The man's smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say we represent the Harper family's interests. You've been meddling in matters that don't concern you, and we're here to offer you an opportunity to walk away." Amelia stepped forward, ignoring Ethan's warning glance. "If you think you can intimidate me, you're wasting your time," she said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with determination. The man's smile faded. "This isn't a negotiation, Miss Harper. It's a warning. Drop the story, destroy the documents, and disappear. Do that, and this ends here." "And if I don't?" Amelia asked, crossing her arms. The man's gaze turned cold. "Then you'll find out just how unpleasant we can be." Ethan stepped between them, his tone sharp. "You've delivered your message. Now get out." The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to Jack, who stood silently in the corner, watching like a predator waiting to pounce. Finally, the man nodded to his companions, and they turned to leave. But before they stepped into the elevator, the man looked back at Amelia. "Think about it," he said. "Some battles aren't worth the cost." When the door closed, the tension in the room snapped like a taut wire. Ethan locked the door and turned to Amelia, his frustration evident. "That was reckless," he said. "You don't engage with people like that." Amelia shot him a glare. "What was I supposed to do? Let them scare me into giving up?" Jack spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "They're testing you. If they see weakness, they'll press harder. But if you stand your ground, they'll have to reconsider their approach." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is escalating too fast. We need to get out of here and go to the station before they make their next move." Amelia nodded, gathering the documents and shoving them into a bag. The 3 of them left the apartment quickly, taking a cab to the news station where Lauren was waiting. The ride was tense, each of them scanning the streets for any sign of a tale. When they arrived, Lauren met them in the lobby, her expression serious. "I heard about the visit," she said, leading them into a secure conference room. "This story has them spooked." "That's a good sign." "Easy for you to say," Ethan muttered. "You're not the one they're threatening." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "You think I haven't been threatened before? This is what they do when they're cornered. It means we're getting close." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Let's just get this over with." The interview was intense. Lauren asked hard-hitting questions, forcing Amelia and Jack to relive the events that had brought them to this point. Jack spoke about Daniel's corruption with a quiet fury, his words painting a damning picture of the Harper family's inner workings. Amelia shared her own story, how she had saved Richard's life, only to find herself dragged into a war she never asked for. By the time the interview ended, Amelia felt drained, but also strangely empowered. They had laid everything on the table, exposed the truth for the world to see. Now all they could do was wait. As they left the station, the air felt charged with anticipation. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city streets. But the moment of calm didn't last. As they reached the parking lot, a sleek black car screeched to a stop in front of them. The doors flew open, and two men stepped out, their expressions grim. Amelia froze, her pulse racing. Before she could react, one of the men grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the car. "Let go of me," she shouted, struggling against his grip. Ethan lunged forward, throwing a punch that landed squarely on the man's jaw. Jack wasn't far behind, taking on the second man with a ferocity that surprised even Amelia. The parking lot erupted into chaos as fists flew and shouts echoed off the concrete walls. Amelia managed to break free, her heart pounding as she watched Ethan and Jack fight off their attackers. The men, clearly unprepared for such resistance, retreated quickly, jumping back into their car and speeding away. Ethan turned to Amelia, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Are you okay?" Amelia nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "What the hell was that?" Jack wiped a smear of blood from his lip, his expression grim. "That was their way of showing us they're serious." The three of them got into their car and drove in tense silence. The attack had shaken them all, but it also strengthened their resolve. The Harpers were desperate, which meant the story was more powerful than they realized. Back at Ethan's apartment, they regrouped, assessing their next steps. Lauren called to let them know the story would go live the next morning, and Amelia felt a surge of relief. Once the story was out, the Harpers would lose their ability to control the narrative. The world would see them for what they truly were. But as the night stretched on, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the Harpers had one last move to make. And when her phone buzzed with an unknown number just after midnight, her blood ran cold. She answered hesitantly. "Hello, Miss Harper," came Daniel's smooth, menacing voice. "I have to commend your bravery. Not many people have the courage to stand against me." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. "This isn't courage. It's justice." Daniel chuckled darkly. "Justice? That's a quaint idea. But let me remind you, justice doesn't always favor the brave. Sometimes it favors the powerful." "You're scared," Amelia said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be calling me scared." Daniel's tone sharpened. "No, Miss Harper, I'm just preparing you. Tomorrow, when your little story hits the airwaves, I want you to remember one thing. No matter what you reveal, I always win." The line went dead, leaving Amelia shaking with a mix of fear and anger. She relayed the conversation to Ethan and Jack, who exchanged grim looks. "He's bluffing," Ethan said, though his voice was strained. "He's trying to rattle you." Amelia shook her head. "No, he's planning something." As the first light of dawn broke over the city, Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. The final showdown was approaching, and she had no idea what Daniel Harper's next move would be. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. The morning was unnervingly quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Amelia sat in Ethan's living room, her heart pounding as the clock ticked closer to the moment Lauren's story would go live. The documents were ready, the interviews complete, and the evidence irrefutable. The Harpers' reign of intimidation and corruption was about to face its first real challenge. Ethan paced the room while Jack leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the floor. No one spoke, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Amelia clutched her phone, waiting for Lauren's confirmation that the story had gone live. At exactly 8 a.m., her phone buzzed. A single text from Lauren lit up the screen. "It's out." Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she opened the link to the article. There it was, in bold headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Secrets of the Harper dynasty. Fraud, corruption, and a family at war. The story laid everything bare. The offshore accounts, the embezzlement, the threats, and even Daniel Harper's attempts to intimidate Amelia into silence. "This is it," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "It's out." Ethan stopped pacing and came to stand behind her, peering over her shoulder at the article. "You did it," he said quietly. "Now the world knows the truth." Jack didn't look up, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over yet." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" Jack pushed off the wall, his jaw tight. Daniel won't just sit back and take this. He'll come at us harder now. And if he's desperate enough, he'll play dirty. Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. All three of them froze, exchanging wary glances. Ethan moved cautiously to the door, checking the peephole. "It's Lauren," he said, relief evident in his voice as he opened the door. Lauren stepped inside, her expression grim. "We need to talk." Amelia's stomach churned. "What's wrong?" Lauren pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and handed it to Amelia. "This arrived at the station an hour ago." Amelia unfolded the note, her hands trembling. The message was simple, written in bold, slashing letters. "Last chance. Walk away or suffer the consequences." "They're panicking," Lauren said. "The story hit harder than I expected. My sources are telling me the Harpers are scrambling to contain the damage. But Daniel's not going down without a fight." Amelia's hands clenched around the note. "Let him come. I'm done running." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "You might not have a choice. There are rumors that Daniel is planning to file a defamation lawsuit. If he does, it could bury us in legal fees." "We have the truth on our side," Amelia said fiercely. "Truth doesn't always win," Jack said quietly. "Not when you're up against someone like Daniel." Amelia turned to him, her frustration bubbling over. "Then what's the point of any of this? If they can just silence us, why even try?" Jack met her gaze, his voice steady. "Because fighting back is the only way we win. Even if it costs us everything." The room fell silent as Amelia absorbed his words. She knew he was right. The Harpers thrived on fear and silence. By standing up to them, she was breaking the cycle, even if it meant putting herself at risk. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The fallout from the story was immediate and explosive. News outlets picked up the article, spreading the scandal far and wide. Social media erupted with outrage, demanding accountability from the Harper family. But with the attention came danger. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was preparing his next move. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amelia's phone buzzed again. This time it was a video message. She opened it hesitantly, her heart sinking as Daniel's face appeared on the screen. "Congratulations, Miss Harper," Daniel said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've managed to drag my family's name through the mud. I hope it was worth it, because now the gloves come off." The screen cut to footage of the mansion upstate, the place Richard Harper had left to Amelia. Flames licked the walls as the structure burned, the fire consuming everything in its path. Amelia's breath caught as she realized what she was seeing. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's voice returned, cold and calculating. "Consider this a warning. If you keep pushing, the next thing I destroy won't be a house. It'll be everything you care about." The video ended, leaving Amelia shaking with anger and fear. Ethan and Jack watched in stunned silence, their expressions grim. "He's escalating," Ethan said, his voice tight. "We need to go to the police." "They won't do anything," Jack said bitterly. "Not against someone like Daniel." Amelia stood, her hands trembling but her resolve hardening. "I'm not letting him win. He thinks he can scare me into giving up. But he's wrong." "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked, his tone cautious. Amelia met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. "We expose him even further. If he wants to play dirty, so will we. Over the next few days, Amelia, Ethan, Jack, and Lauren worked tirelessly to uncover more dirt on Daniel. Every email, every transaction, every connection. They left no stone unturned. And as the pieces fell into place, they found something Daniel hadn't expected. A paper trail linking him to violent acts, including arson and threats against competitors. With this new evidence, Lauren published a follow-up story, this time focusing on Daniel's personal crimes. The public outrage grew, and law enforcement was finally forced to step in. Warrants were issued, and Daniel's once untouchable empire began to crumble. Amelia watched the news coverage with a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was over. The Harpers had been exposed, their power stripped away. But as much as she wanted to celebrate, she couldn't forget the cost. The threats, the fear, and the mansion lost to the flames. In the weeks that followed, Amelia began to rebuild her life. The inheritance, though diminished, was still hers, and she used it to start fresh. She left the city, choosing a quieter life in the countryside, where she could finally find peace. Ethan stayed by her side, their bond growing stronger as they left the chaos of the Harpers behind. Jack, too, found a sense of closure, using his knowledge of the family's corruption to ensure they could never rise again. One evening, as the sun set over her new home, Amelia sat on the porch, a sense of calm washing over her. She had faced the storm and come out stronger. The Harpers might have tried to destroy her, but in the end, they only proved one thing: she was unbreakable. For the first time in years, Amelia felt free.